The year is 2005. It's been 12 years since the last confirmed murder, and 30 years since the first. For the police department in Wichita, Kansas, the case of the BTK killer is a ghost, a cold trail that haunts every detective who ever worked it. For the public, BTK is a boogeyman, a monster from a distant, terrifying past. But for the killer himself, Dennis Rader, the game is still on. The camera opens on a quiet, suburban home. The lighting is soft, ordinary, suggesting a normal family life. We see a man in a business casual shirt, Dennis Rader, sitting at a desk in his home office. The hum of a computer is the only sound, cutting through the silence. His fingers, calloused from years of work, tap on a keyboard. He's not writing a report for his job or an email to a friend. He's composing a letter to the police. This isn't the first time. For years, BTK had been taunting law enforcement, sending them letters filled with macabre details of his crimes, poems, and puzzles. But this time, something is different. Rader has an idea. He wants to know if the police can track a floppy disk. He's been out of the loop on technology for a while, and he wants to test them. He types out a message on a floppy disk, saves it, and slides it into an envelope, ready to mail. He's confident. This is, after all, his genius. He's been a step ahead for decades. He believes his anonymous persona is impenetrable. A quiet, confident voiceover breaks the silence. For over 3 decades, Dennis Rader lived 2 lives. By day, he was a husband, a father, a church council president, a respected member of his community. By night, he was a predator, a monster who terrorized a city and vanished without a trace. His identity was the most guarded secret in American true crime history. His capture was a miracle of forensics and police work. But it wasn't a breakthrough that brought him down. It was a simple, confident question, an arrogant, almost playful test. The killer, who had spent a lifetime covering his tracks, who had meticulously planned every crime, who reveled in his own cunning, would be caught because he asked a question. He wanted to know if a floppy disk could be traced. What he didn't realize was that the answer would be his undoing. The voiceover ends and the screen goes black. The words, "The floppy disk killer," appear on screen, followed by the image of a simple black floppy disk. In the mid-1970s, Wichita, Kansas, was the picture of American heartland normalcy. A city built on aviation, agriculture, and a sense of close-knit community. It was a place where people left their doors unlocked, where children played freely in the streets until dusk, and where trust was the default setting. The sense of security was palpable, a quiet confidence in the order of the world. It was a world that made what was to come all the more terrifying. Into this world, we introduced Dennis Rader. He was, by all appearances, unremarkable. Born in Pittsburgh, Kansas in 1945, he served in the Air Force, married his wife Paula, and had 2 children, Carrie and Brian. In the 1970s, he was a family man, working in various jobs, and was an active member of the Christ Lutheran Church. He was seen as a pillar of his community, dependable and quiet. He was a Cub Scout leader, a church council president, and later, an animal control officer. People who knew him described him as rigid, a bit of a stickler for rules, but fundamentally harmless. He was the man next door, the kind of person you'd wave to while mowing your lawn. He was the embodiment of normalcy. We also meet the victims. They were not connected to each other, but they all lived in the same city, sharing the same sense of security and trust that defined Wichita. There was the Otero family. Joseph, 38. Julie, 33. Their son Joseph Jr., 9. And their daughter Josephine, 11. They were a normal, loving family. Joseph Otero had served in the Air Force. Julie was a devoted mother. Their children were young, with their whole lives ahead of them. We hear from family members and friends speaking of the joy they brought into the world. He was just the kindest man, says a tearful friend. The date is January 15th, 1974, a cold Tuesday morning in Wichita, Kansas. Joseph and Julie Otero, along with their two young children, Josephine and Joseph Jr., are at home. The house on 1417 North Edgemore Street is a picture of domestic tranquility. The family is getting ready for the day. A typical weekday morning unfolds with the familiar chaos of breakfast and school. Suddenly, the tranquility is shattered. Dennis Rader, posing as a telephone repairman, gains entry to the home. His demeanor is calm, his movements practiced. He carries a handgun and a length of cord. This isn't a random act of violence. It's a meticulously planned invasion. The narrative follows his every step with chilling, almost clinical detail. He ties up the family one by one, methodically securing them, a predator in complete control. He binds them with the care and precision of a craftsman, an ominous reflection of his later moniker, BTK, bind, torture, kill. The tension is unbearable as the family realizes their lives are not their own. Joseph Otero, ever the protector, struggles against his bonds, but it's no use. Rader's control is absolute. The children, Josephine and Joseph Jr., are terrified, their cries for their parents silenced by fear. The scene unfolds with horrifying slowness. Rader moves through the house, committing one unspeakable act after another. The details are not gratuitous, but they are vivid enough to convey the sheer terror of the moment. We describe the sounds: a muffled cry, a creak on the floorboards, the quiet movements of a man carrying out a horrific plan. The silence that follows is even more deafening than the struggle. The crime is discovered by the two older Otero children, Charlie and Jeff, who were not at home at the time. They return to find the front door unlocked, the house eerily quiet. They call out for their parents, but receive no answer. The narrative describes the children's growing unease. The moment their innocence is shattered, we see the discovery through their eyes, a bedroom door ajar, a glimpse of a scene that no child should ever witness. The horror of the moment is amplified by the fact that they are just children, home from school, expecting a normal afternoon. We hear their frantic 911 call, their voices trembling with fear and disbelief. The audio is an immediate, gut-wrenching hook, a raw window into a family's worst nightmare. The call is a desperate plea for help that arrives too late. The police are alerted. The first responders arrive on the scene, a grim tableau of violence and despair. The community's sense of security is shattered. A serial killer is loose, and he has just made his terrifying introduction. The immediate aftermath is a blur of flashing lights, sirens, and the somber faces of uniformed officers. A new kind of fear descends on Wichita, a fear that would linger for decades. The crime scene is processed, but there is little to go on. A phantom has struck, and the city holds its breath, wondering who he is and when he will strike again. The BTK investigation began in a state of chaos. The Otero murders were unlike anything the Wichita Police Department had ever seen. The sheer brutality and the methodical nature of the crime suggested a killer who was not only sadistic, but also meticulous. Detectives swarmed the crime scene, but the evidence was sparse. The killer had been careful, leaving behind few clues. Forensic technology in the 1970s was rudimentary compared to today. There was no DNA database, no widespread surveillance. The police were working with what they had: a few eyewitness descriptions, a sense of a male intruder, and the grim reality that a monster was on the loose. The case went cold quickly. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months with no leads. Then, a new victim, Catherine Bright, a 21-year-old woman, was murdered in April 1974. Her brother, Kevin, was also attacked but managed to survive, providing police with their first real physical description of the killer. But even with a witness, the trail went cold again. The city was in a state of perpetual fear. Rumors flew, Neighbors became suspects, and the once trusting community was now filled with suspicion. Then, a chilling development. In October 1974, a letter arrived at a Wichita Eagle Beacon newspaper. It was signed with the letters BTK, and it claimed responsibility for the Otero murders. The letter was a detailed confession, a boastful and narcissistic account of his crimes, filled with macabre details only the killer could know. This was a new kind of killer, one who craved attention, who wanted to be known, but not caught. He reveled in his power over the city, and the investigation entered a new, terrifying phase. The letters would continue intermittently for years, filled with taunts, poems, and puzzles. He named himself BTK, an acronym for bind, torture, kill, and his chilling moniker became a household name. The decades that followed were a testament to the police's relentless, yet frustrating, pursuit. The case was a ghost on the police department's books, a constant reminder of their failure to catch the killer. They followed countless red herrings. They interviewed thousands of people. Criminal profilers were brought in, creating a psychological profile of a man who was likely a loner, a man of power, and a man who was deeply disturbed. The profile was accurate, but it provided no name. The public, tired of living in fear, began to believe that the killer was either dead or had moved on. The BTK case faded from the headlines, becoming a dark footnote in the city's history. Then, in 2004, BTK returned. A new letter arrived at the Wichita Eagle, and this time he was more arrogant than ever. The letters continued, a macabre correspondence that reignited the investigation. In 2005, the police received a letter from BTK. The capture and conviction of Dennis Rader brought a complicated sense of closure to Wichita. On one hand, the decades-long nightmare was finally over. The monster who had terrorized the city for so long had a name and a face, and he was behind bars. But on the other hand, the revelation of his identity opened up new wounds. The families of the victims had to grapple not only with the loss of their loved ones, but also with the disturbing reality that the killer was a man who had lived among them, a seemingly normal man who had committed such unspeakable acts. The Otero children, in particular, had to live with the knowledge that the man who had murdered their family was, for years, an ordinary face in their community. The case had a profound and lasting impact on law enforcement. The use of digital forensics in Rader's case was a groundbreaking moment. It demonstrated the power of digital trails, however small, in solving complex crimes. The metadata on the floppy disk, a seemingly insignificant detail, became a powerful tool for justice. Law enforcement agencies across the country began to invest more heavily in digital forensics, understanding that every keystroke, every digital footprint, could be a clue. The BTK case became a cautionary tale for criminals and a lesson for police. In the digital age, it is impossible to be a ghost. The case also had a significant cultural impact. It was a story so bizarre and horrifying that it captured the public's imagination. Numerous books were written about the case, from true crime narratives to psychological analyses. Documentaries and television specials were produced, dissecting the mind of Dennis Rader and the methods of the BTK killer. The case even influenced fictional portrayals of serial killers, with the archetype of the man next door becoming a staple in true crime and horror genres. The story of BTK serves as a chilling reminder that evil can hide in the most mundane places and that the line between normalcy and depravity can be frighteningly thin. The BTK case will forever be a part of American true crime history, a testament to a killer's arrogance and the slow but steady march of justice. The case of Dennis Rader is a fascinating and disturbing study in criminal psychology. Experts who have studied him believe he exhibited all the classic traits of a sadistic, narcissistic serial killer. His motives were not rooted in financial gain or a desire for revenge, but in a profound need for control and power. From an early age, Rader developed sadistic fantasies, which he later acted out. The act of binding, torturing, and killing was not just a method. It was a ritual that gave him a sense of absolute dominance over his victims. He saw them as objects to be used, not as human beings with families and lives. His obsession with his work and his need for recognition from the police and the public are classic hallmarks of a narcissistic personality. Rader's crimes were a form of self-expression, a way for him to feel powerful in a life he perceived as mundane and insignificant. The letters he sent to the media were not just taunts. They were a way for him to reassert his power over the narrative. He was the author of his own horrifying story, and he wanted the world to know it. The legal aspects of his case were also telling. When he was finally caught, he didn't run, and he didn't resist. His quiet confession in court was his final act of control. He wanted to be the one to tell the story, to lay out the horrifying details in his own words. He was not remorseful. He was, in his own twisted way, proud. The legal system handled the case with a quiet efficiency, as Rader's own confession removed the need for a lengthy trial with emotional testimony. He pled guilty, and the judge, based on the overwhelming evidence, had no choice but to sentence him to the maximum possible sentence. The legal proceedings were a reflection of the man himself, cold, clinical, and devoid of emotion. In the end, Dennis Rader was not a genius. He was a deeply disturbed man who was finally caught not by a grand police operation or a brilliant detective's insight, but by his own monstrous ego. He craved the spotlight so much that he couldn't resist the temptation to play one last game with the police. In his final act of defiance, his pride became his downfall. The floppy disk, a relic of a bygone technological era, was his undoing. It was a simple, mundane piece of technology that carried the digital footprint of a man who had successfully hidden in plain sight for 30 years. The chilling final thought is a quote from Dennis Rader himself, taken from one of his final letters. "There's a lot of me out there, a lot of BTK." The quote serves as a haunting reminder of the psychological terror he inflicted and the lingering presence he has in the true crime world. The episode ends with a question to the viewer. The man who was a pillar of his community, who lived next door, who went to church, who was a father and a husband, was a serial killer. The monster wasn't a shadow in the night. He was a friend, a neighbor, a trusted member of society.